some very, very sad news that we got yesterday. And that is that one of the greatest players that ever lived, a man who I've always said will always, for all time, have a spot in my top 10 players of all time. 5-time MVP and 11-time, a record, NBA champion Bill Russell passed away yesterday at the age of 88. Now, as a player, Bill Russell was one of the more dominant defensive forces that we've ever seen. You know, when we talk about guys in today's game, Rudy Gobert, Miles Turner, Robert Williams, some of the best shot blockers in the league, they have Mr. Russell to thank. He was really, we talk about how Steph Curry changed the game in terms of the three-point shot. Well, you could argue that Bill Russell changed the game in terms of the block shot. He only averaged 15 points a game. Could have averaged more. But when you look at his impact on the Boston Celtics in the 50s and in the 60s, he had about the greatest impact on winning of any player that we've really seen in the NBA. 11 championships in 13 years. It's unprecedented. Nobody will ever do it again. As a matter of fact, Bill Russell, years ago in the 1990s, was talking to Michael Jordan. Now, mind you, Michael Jordan is at the peak of his powers. He is obviously easily the best player in the world. Everybody wants to be like Mike. You know, he's like almost like second place to God in some people's eyes, right? And Jordan was talking to Bill Russell. He said, I'm going to break your record. And Bill Russell said, which one? Because the Bulls they've been winning some championships. I think they'd won 2 or 3 straight by this point. And he said, I'm going to beat your record. Bill Russell said, which one? 8 straight championships or 11 total championships. I would argue 8 straight is more difficult to beat than 11, in my view. Because as impossible as 11 championships sound, and again, I truly cannot envision certainly any player in today's game, much less anybody in the future, breaking that mark. But 8 straight championships. LeBron went to 8 straight finals. That in itself is just wow. But in many of those finals, LeBron's team was clearly the underdog. They were playing these great Warriors teams or Spurs teams. Bill Russell won 8 straight championships, leading the Boston Celtics to that point. Granted, he did have a great supporting cast. He did have the great Red Auerbach as his head coach. But when you talk about the impact that this man had on winning, go back to his days at the University of San Francisco in college. He won 2 straight national championships. It's funny, I was talking about Al Horford a month ago possibly being a Hall of Famer because he is one of very, very few college basketball players, men's or women's, that has won 2 straight national championships. Bill Russell did that. He comes to the NBA. 11 titles in 13 years. He won the last 2 titles as a player/head coach. He coached and played for the Boston Celtics. When you talk about his unselfishness, deferring to other teammates so that they could succeed. When you talk about his epic battles year in and year out with the great Wilt Chamberlain. It's the greatest center rivalry that we've ever had, and that'll probably never be surpassed. This was what Bill Russell was as a basketball player. We know about the 11 rings. We know the iconic picture, probably taken 20, 25 years ago, where he's sitting there, kind of his hand and on his chin resting on his hands, and he's got all 11 rings on his fingers. But it was off the court where Bill Russell made his greatest impact. As great as he was on the court, man won 5 MVPs. Okay, like the 11 championships are, unbelievably impressive. 8 straight, but the 5 MVPs, very few have done that. Very few. And so Michael Jordan, Kareem, very short list. But off the court was where he made his greatest impact. People don't realize what this man went through playing in the city that he played in. This is not to take any backhanded shots at Boston, at least certainly in the present day. But back when Mr. Russell played, it was hell for this man. You think about the racism, not just slurs being shouted at him or racially provoked language during the game, but When he initially got to Boston, initially couldn't buy a home. And he and his black teammates were rejected from restaurants. Mr. Russell was at the 1963 March on Washington in August, the site, of course, of Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech. Mr. Russell was there. Matter of fact, they actually asked him to speak, and he said, I don't feel worthy to speak, and at the same protest that Martin Luther King is speaking at. The 1967 summit in support of Muhammad Ali having his title stripped because he did not support the Vietnam War. It was him. It was Lew Alcindor, now Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It was Jim Brown. It was Muhammad Ali. That iconic picture of those four sitting there. It was Bill Russell who did that. It was Bill Russell who paved the way for athletes to come after him, to speak about inequalities that we see in today's society. In terms of athletes, you could argue Mr. Russell was one of the pioneers. Certainly in the National Basketball Association. He, along with Kareem, I think were really the true trailblazers in that regard. You think about his personality, too. He had and I said on social media yesterday, the greatest laugh that you have ever heard in your life. Full of joy, full of heart. He was wise. I saw the video, got me kind of emotional of him and Kobe at the 2006 All-Star game when Kobe was talking about, wanting to find each player's agenda. Every time he played, he wanted to know what the player's agenda was. And he said that he had read Bill Russell's book talking just about that. And Bill Russell put both of his hands on Kobe's shoulders and said, I couldn't be more proud of you if you were my own son. He praised the younger generation. He gave advice. He gave tips. He had relationships with the future generations of basketball players to come. And so you think about the 88 years that this man had on the planet, all that he was able to accomplish. On the court, winning, I want to reiterate again, 11 NBA titles. It's incredible. I get there were 8 teams, but 7 other teams had a shot to beat Boston. And in one instance, for 8 straight years, couldn't. Mr. Russell led them to that. The Finals MVP is now named after Bill Russell, has been since 2009. And so to live this remarkable life that he lived, the standards that he set in terms of leadership on and off the court, in terms of winning on the court, and inspiring change off of it, we've never seen anybody quite like Bill Russell. And so when I got the news yesterday, it was like, we lost a good one. We lost a good one yesterday. And, I get he lived to 88, he lived a full life, but it was just kind of like, wow, like that's shocking. Like, I was looking at my phone yesterday and the Shams Charania tweet came across my phone. It's like, wow, I can't believe this. And so for him to be gone, man, it's definitely sad. But today, to me, is a day that we get to celebrate his life, celebrate his contributions to society, to this country, to the National Basketball Association. You saw so many players, come out and speak about the impact that he had. It's sad. The commissioner, of course, spoke about it, Adam Silver. So my thoughts, my prayers, my condolences go out to his wife. I believe her name is Janine, and entire family, loved ones, all that knew Bill Russell. He was a special man. Bill Russell passed away at the age of 88 yesterday. We have a comment here. My man Barry Grant Jr. is in the comments. Shout out to Barry. He says, the most influential athlete in my eyes, especially for African Americans. What he had to go through in standing up and supporting Ali was monumental. Forever grateful for what he did for the game. Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, we talk about athletes that have changed the game, as you mentioned, Barry, as many have pointed out, on and off the court. I mean, few really have been quite as impactful as Bill Russell. And the thing was, too, like you mentioned, Barry, in the comments, the support of Ali. People think about, and people think often about these civil rights activists like a Muhammad Ali, like a Martin Luther King Jr. today in very glowing terms. We have an MLK Day. We celebrate the greatest Muhammad Ali. We do the float like a butterfly, steam like a bee. We quote these great men. But people got to realize, man, in the 60s, they were about the most unpopular people in America. As a matter of fact, MLK, well, I saw this the other day. It was a poll, I think it was 1963, 64, early to mid 60s. And there was a poll about the most hated people in the world. And Martin Luther King Jr. came in second behind Nikita Khrushchev, the mastermind that almost got us involved in a nuclear war that, thankfully, President John F. Kennedy and others got us out of, the Cuban Missile Crisis. MLK was only second to that guy. That's how unpopular that these civil rights activists were in the 60s, and Bill Russell walked lockstep with these men. And he was one of the great civil rights activists of all time, certainly among athletes. As Barry says, it was not looked as a positive for quite a while. LOL. Absolutely. Not in the slightest. And especially, again, to me, the irony, I was reading this today, the irony about, the whole Boston thing about him dealing with the racism that he dealt with is that the Boston Celtics actually in the it might have been 67, I think it was, the late 60s, they had the very first all-black starting lineup in NBA history. And then you have, certainly the greatest shame I have as a Red Sox fan. I mean, look, I know I didn't have anything to do with it, but it's a terrible mark on the franchise. But the Boston Red Sox were the final MLB team to have a black player on their roster. Last team to ever do it. And the Boston Celtics in that city had the first all-black starting lineup. Bill Russell had impact on that. And Red Auerbach had impact on that. He was somebody who was an ally. And so, lose Mr. Russell yesterday. Some funny videos posted on social media, him flipping off Charles Barkley at the NBA Awards a few years back. I remember watching that. It was hilarious. He actually apologized. He said, I didn't realize I was on camera. And then the funniest one was from a few years back. He won like some sort of lifetime achievement award, and all of these great NBA centers were presenting him the award. It was Shaq, it was Kareem, David Robinson, Dikembe Mutombo were presenting them this award. And they're on stage. Mutombo is holding Bill Russell's award, and Bill Russell points at him. He said, "I would kick your what." And so it was so funny. But up until his final breath, he was full of wit. Very just a lovable man, and he will certainly be missed. And so definitely that Bill Russell Finals MVP trophy, without a question, certainly holds much more meaning now than I think even it did dating back to when it was named the Bill Russell Finals MVP back in 2009. So Bill Russell, what a life, what a man, and never seen one quite like him. So we will miss him without a question. His family, of course, will miss him. Loved ones, the National Basketball Association. Bill Russell passed away at the age of 88 yesterday.